Welcome to another episode of the Cassels Cast. My name's Eamon Cassels. Joining me today is going to be Collin Hatfield. We're going to be going over our 5 favorite storylines to watch for in the post All-Star break segment of the NBA season. Should be a ton of fun, so without any further ado, let's just get into the episode. All right, joining the show now is Collin Hatfield. How are you doing today, man?
Doing very good. Excited to get on here and talk ball. Been anticipating hopping on here for a while now, so excited.
Absolutely excited to have you on. And today we're going to be discussing just the 5 most exciting things to watch for the rest of the NBA season now that we're coming out of the All Star break. So, as the guest, I'll have you kickstart things and give us your first thing that you're excited to watch play out throughout the rest of the season.
Awesome. Excited to kick things off. So the first thing that I am paying attention to is the Rookie of the Year race. I don't think a lot of people anticipated this clouded of a race and it changing this much throughout the season. I think VJ Edgecombe kind of hopped out to a really hot start and people were kind of assigning the award to him, and then Cooper Flag really starts to pick it up. But meanwhile, the whole time, Con Knipple having an amazing rookie year, 19-5, super efficient, helping to kind of spearhead this rebuild or retool of the Charlotte Hornets. So I've just been thoroughly impressed by all three of those guys. And when I say roles, you got to think that there's a real possibility that everyone in the top five besides Ace Bailey gets legitimate playoff minutes. Except for, well, Cooper Flag as well. I think they're a bit on the cusp and Kyrie's not going to be coming back. But Con Knipple and Charlotte are seated in the play-in. Philly is likely to avoid the play-in. They're going to have decent seeding, it looks like, in the East. So yeah, I'm excited to see some of these guys get a chance to play. Dylan Harper as well. They're looking like the second seed out in the West. So I'm just very excited to see how these roles pan out and who kind of firmly takes the award away. Right now, my top two is Knipple and Flag. I think Knipple's been more consistent, but if you're adding in context, Flag has been expected to be the number one at times, to be the point guard, to be the defensive anchor. So he's had this rotating role that he's, really fulfilled at a high level. So I'm very excited to watch that award race down the rest of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great one. And I mean, this rookie class has just been nothing like I've ever seen before, quite frankly. And it's only going to
Hmm.
continue next year because this next draft class is also insane. But it's crazy just how many rookies have been good off the jump and have continued their success throughout the season. And then, like you said, how many of these guys are on really good teams when you look at VJ, Harper, and Con specifically. And then Con with the Hornets, they're rising up the standings. So they are a legitimately good team at this point.
Right.
It's really crazy. And I'm very excited to see those three guys in a playoff setting, but even guys like Cooper Flag, Cedric Howard, Derek Queen, those are three awesome rookies who are doing it with not a ton of talent around them, and I think that's super impressive. And I mean, I feel like right now it's kind of between Con and Cooper for the Rookie of the Year race, and it's a matter of personal preference. Do you prefer Con, who has contributed a little bit more to winning basketball? He's been a little bit more consistent. I do think offensively he has been a bit better. Or do you prefer Cooper, who's just been tasked with so many responsibilities on both ends of the floor on a worse team? Personally, I'm kind of leaning Cooper right now, but I don't think it's a guarantee, and that's a bit surprising given what we saw earlier in the season and leading up to the season, certainly. So it will definitely be fun to see how this plays out. But yeah, I mean, just an insane Rookie of the Year race. And then I would probably say Edgecombe is like comfortably third for me. But do you have a take on that sort of third place guy? Do you think it's Edgecombe, or do you maybe value like someone like Harper or Queen?
I would have to say Edgecombe just because he really shouldered a lot of burden for that team until Joel Embiid got back. I mean, realistically, he was their number two for about the first month and a half of the year. And for a rookie to step in and do that, be as box office as he was while still playing winning basketball, defending, bringing energy, and now we're seeing him shift into more of a team friendly role where I'm focused on defense. I'm seeing my value off the ball, cutting, all of these different type of mechanisms. I would have to give him the slight edge over Harper. And it's tough because you never really see the number two pick drafted into an elite winning situation. But even within that, like props need to be given because a lot of guys wouldn't have the humility to step into a really refined role, receive less minutes, and have to be committed on the defensive end, have to find ways to contribute while not being even the third option at times on the team. So I think both of those guys deserve props, but I'm gonna go VJ as my comfortable third as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. I mean, like you said, BJ's just carried so much responsibilities really since day one, especially when Embiid's health was a little bit up in the air. But yeah, I mean, I love this season from Dylan Harper, and I feel like it's gotten a little underrated. And I feel like really what's made this Spurs team work is obviously you have Wemby, that's huge, but it's been the
Yeah.
three guards. I mean, especially we saw that against OKC. That's a massive advantage for them, and I think that will carry over into the playoffs. And Harper's been a huge part of that. I think it's a little bit ridiculous. I mean, to even be doing redraft conversations at this point. But I have seen some people saying, "Hey, man, Con should have gone number two." The Spurs are regretting that. I don't think you could be regretting taking Dylan Harper, quite frankly. And
No.
I think he's going to be an awesome player.
100%. Like you said, are we really talking about redrafts and we weren't even at the All-Star break of this season? That's ridiculous. I think Khan would have been a great fit in San Antonio, but you look at the long-term pairing of having an elite pick and roll point guard next to Victor Wembanyama. We saw what CP3 was able to do with him in just a season past his prime. So I think it was an amazing pick. And once again, people often leave out the context of him playing behind two other very established guards in the league. I think both the Hornets and the Spurs got the guys that they needed. And we should probably just, leave the redraft talks down for at least a season or two and see how these guys develop.
Yeah, most definitely. I feel like it is way too early, and he is really a perfect fit with that Spurs team. And honestly, like
Hmm.
just looking at the top four, I know it's way too early to do these type of conversations, but I don't think you could say anyone's regretting their selection. I think they all
No.
kind of got the guys that they wanted. And yeah, I'd just prefer that to be sort of the conversation. But regardless, this has been an awesome rookie class.
Hmm.
Obviously, we talked a lot about Con already, but I think that transitions us nicely to my first in, and that would be, can the Charlotte Hornets sustain this success? They were on a crazy streak before the All Star break, and they're just a couple games behind the Miami Heat for that eight seed. They're comfortably in that play-in race now. I don't know if they're going to finish as a regular season top eight team, but I do feel pretty comfortable saying that they'll be in the play-in, and I do kind of like their upside, at least to get into the playoffs ahead of teams like Miami or Atlanta. And just in general, this Hornets team has been so fun to watch, and it's really surprised me. I kind of like what they did in the offseason, but I wasn't expecting to watch as many Hornets games as I have so far this season. Obviously, Khan's a big part of that. We talked a lot about him. Brandon Miller, I feel like, has gone a little bit under the radar, especially since he returned from injury. It really helped them rise up in the standings, and he's been a huge part of their success. LaMelo Ball, I think he deserves a lot of credit. I think this is some of the best basketball he's played. He's really buying into a lot of areas that many people, myself included, were wondering if he could. I feel like the decision making has been a lot better. The defense, obviously, it's still a work in progress, but I do think it's been improved upon. And Charles Lee is doing a tremendous job. I think he deserves a lot of credit with that new system, and it makes them so fun to watch. Just the way they move, the ball movement, the cutting, the shooting, it's all there, and it's really, in my eyes, like the epitome of modern basketball. And then another thing I'd like to shout out the Hornets with is just like their center rotation was a big point of criticism heading into the year, and understandably so. They didn't have many big names, but they've really found ways to maximize this. And I mean, you look at them in the Celtics, and it's sort of like I'm not the first person to point this out, but it's sort of like the Moneyball version of basketball. Having centers for cheap, developing them, and just having good, efficient centers who are rim runners. They can grab rebounds, they can defend the
Yes.
paint, they can do all those like essential responsibilities of a center for a super cheap cost. You look at Kalkbrenner, who they got in the second round, Diabate, who's been there for a couple years. I just really love that style of play, and personally, like if I'm looking to get a center, I don't, unless it's like a superstar. Obviously, you love your superstars, but if
Hmm.
I'm looking to get a center, I just want like a sturdy role player, sort of like the Hornets have in that rotation. So there's a lot to like with this team, and I'm super interested to see if they can make things interesting in terms of the playoff race. And right now, I do feel pretty confident saying that they're gonna snag that eight seed, whether it's through the play-in or they finish there, in the regular season.
100% agree. I very interested to see what Charlotte does down the stretch of the year. And within that run that they made right before the All-Star break, there were some really quality wins. They knocked off Denver, they knocked off Houston, they took the Pistons to the brink. Like, this is a really competitive team. In the half court, they're ranked ninth in offensive rating. Like you said, the epitome of modern basketball. You have a creative wizard at the point guard position in LaMelo, who is maybe to his detriment and also to his benefit, an extreme risk taker, a tough shot maker, all of these different kind of wild elements he combines. And then you have maybe one of the best guard to guard screeners in the league already in Con Knipple. It's amazing what he can do and his ability to read and then shoot out of those actions. And I am so happy to see Brandon Miller really kind of take that step recently and really look like the guy that they needed on the wing. He got a ton of Paul George comp out of college, and you're really kind of seeing that off the ball ability reminiscent of a young Pacers PG. So I'm very excited for them, but I do have a question for you. Con Knippel's career arc is very interesting to me. I think there is a potential, and it depends on the situation around him and his own development, that we could one day see him in a Devin Booker type of light. I don't think we'll ever see him as high usage on the ball as Devin Booker is, because he doesn't have quite the first step that Book has. However, he has a lot of juice on the ball and he can create when he needs to. So do you think there's a potential that one day we see him in kind of this closer to 50-50 on ball and off ball role where he is labeled as a true number one? Do you think that's within his skill set?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Honestly, like I kind of have a tough time with player comparisons sometimes, but I do
Mm-hmm.
really like that Booker one. I feel like every player is like so unique, and
Yeah.
it's like I like to view it as like shades of guys. But one guy that I always sort of compared him to coming out of the draft was Desmond Bain, and
Mm-hmm.
immediately, it really from the first few months of the season, I was like, wow, he like almost has as much on ball juice as Desmond Bain right now. And honestly, ranking players, I might have him above Bain already, which is crazy to say. So I
Mm-hmm.
do really like the Booker one, and yeah, I do think that's sort of like his ceiling. I do think he's always going to need, I mean, like most players, especially in the modern NBA, like another ball handler next to him, whether that's Lamelo or someone else down the road, who knows? But yeah, I could definitely see that where he's viewed as more of that like combo guard, whereas right now I feel like a lot of people would label him as like a quote unquote win. So I could definitely see that down the road, and I do like that comparison a lot. And I don't think I've ever heard that one before, but his ability, obviously, as like a spot up shooter and ability to move off screens and stuff like that is similar. But also what he has as a shot creator, I can see the similarities to Booker. So I do really like that one. And I mean, with this Hornets team, I mean, it's really interesting because with Miller, Lamelo, and Khan, I feel like they have like three really, really good players.
Yeah.
And I ultimately don't know at this team ceiling which one of those guys is going to be like the quote unquote number one option. But I'd lean towards Khan at this point. But yeah, just a super interesting team, and I do like that comparison for sure.
Yeah. Eyes will be on them in the future. And obviously, as the season ends, they're no longer going to be a sleeper. And so it's going to be a team that you're really ready for. And so interested to see the route that they take in the near future. But for my number two, we're sticking in the same conference. It's all about the standouts in the East. You can say that the Pistons have pulled away as the clear number one, and I won't argue with you. But still, with that, the Eastern Conference is wide open. No one expected for the Boston Celtics to come out and have the season that they've had. And, tip of the cap to Jaylen Brown. He's played some amazing basketball, but Joe Mazzulla is a madman. And I really believe that this was kind of the perfect storm for him to showcase just how great of a coach he is. I remembered hearing him talk about how they wanted to be more aggressive defensively, turn you over, play a bit faster, and they haven't played, at a blazing pace, but they turn you over. They're undersized, but their guards still hit the offensive glass. They get up a ton of threes, and then late in games, they're working through Jaylen Brown and Peyton Pritchard. So they've concocted this really odd roster that is able to win the possession battle, defensively can still, turn you over if need be, protect the potential liabilities on the floor. The player development, as you mentioned, is really good. We're seeing that with teams across the league now, but they have this center by committee thing going on between Garza, Cada, and Vooch, who was just acquired, but they're also developing Hugo Gonzalez. I think he was an amazing draft pick, like all energy, all hustle. So I just think they're doing something really awesome over there. And, they're a team you can't count out. The Knicks, I'm a little nervous for, but, they're still the Knicks. And Jalen Brunson is very proven come playoff time. So they're a team you can't count out either. But then you've got the Cleveland Cavaliers. So just, you've got legit 4 or 5 teams, and I should probably throw the 76ers in there if they're healthy. You've got a couple of teams that could really shake things up, and just how playoff basketball goes. One series where you're really inefficient or someone goes down, that can swing everything. So it's kind of hard to pick a standout team in the East right now for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's been one of the more interesting storylines throughout the season, and we'll have to see in these last 25 games or so how that plays out.
Mhm.
Despite like the stand-ins, and the Pistons have been awesome. They've been one of my favorite teams to watch. I'll talk about them a little bit more in a sec. I just haven't been able to fully get there as like the clear title favorite in the East. And I think that's reasonable for 2 reasons. I guess 3 reasons, mainly like experience. And then the other two would be like secondary creation and shooting next to Cade. I feel like those are very real concerns, especially in the playoffs. But they've been such an awesome team, and I mean, who knows if they go on this crazy run and they challenge maybe the Thunder for the best overall record in the league. They might have to be my pick to come out of the East, and I feel like they would have to be like the consensus favorite at that point. The Knicks have been my pick since the preseason, but I've always had concerns with that defensive pairing of Brunson and Towns. I feel like Mike Brown's new look offense has sort of faded away a little bit. I'd like to see a little bit more involvement from OG and Mikal. So there's a few things that I don't love about that Knicks team, but on paper I do think they're the most talented in the East, and they have had some proven playoff success with that conference finals run last year. So I've always sort of defaulted to picking them. The Cavs now with James Harden, I think there's reason to have playoff concerns. But at the same time, as a number two option instead of that number one option that he's been, and playing next to an elite ball handler in Donovan Mitchell, I feel like that could maybe change. And the Cavs looked good in their 2 or 3 games that we've seen with Harden there. And then I also liked what they did by getting Dennis Schroeder and Keon Ellis. And I mean, talent wise, that's another team that's right up there as the most talented team in the East. So it is super interesting. And then like the Celtics, I'm a Celtics fan, so a little harder for me to be objective, but I just continue to be impressed by this team, and I totally agree about the development. It's been insane to watch, and then obviously Jaylen Brown has been phenomenal. But yeah, what they've been able to do with losing so many key parts of their roster has been insane. And another thing, spoiler, I'm going to talk about Tatum in a little bit. But if Tatum comes back, and I don't think he's going to be top 5 level player in the world, Tatum, but if he comes back and he's still playing at like an all-star level, I think there's a real possibility where this team could be the favorites of the East. So it will be super interesting. I don't know if I'll have my official like pick to come out of the East until we see matchups, to be honest, just because I feel like it is so wide open. And then, like you said, also the Sixers, like if this team's healthy and the upside that they have, I think they do have a very high ceiling. I'm always kind of concerned about the health elements of this team, but at their best, I do think this is a team that could make a finals run. So it's going to be super interesting to see how things play out. And then just another point I'd like to make over the past really 3 or 4 years since that 2023 finals run, I guess, we've just seen surprise teams make finals runs. You look at the Heat, the Mavericks, and then the Pacers. And I do think, especially in the Eastern Conference, we could see another surprise team, not necessarily come out of nowhere, but a surprise finals run from one of these teams.
100%. I love that. And there's teams, like you said, that aren't really being talked about. I actually saw someone, they were running through, like, if the playoffs happen today, matchups, and they were saying that Toronto's, like, by far the worst team in the postseason. I'm like, hold on, pump the brakes. Like, I understand that they're not the, prettiest offense. They don't have a ton of big name, big market guys, but they defend. My goodness, they defend. Colin Murray Boyle, Scotty Barnes, Jamal Shed, like they have guys that are gonna get after you and play very good defense. They've got size. They have the ability to make any series interesting. So I really have my eyes on them, and they're a team I would not want to see in the first round. Depending if they play 5 or if they possibly slip back to 6, whatever position they end up in, like that's a team that is kind of built to mess you up in the first round of the postseason. Brandon Ingram has playoff experience. We've seen him, really turn it up when he needed to, and they've got the defense to back. I like that squad. So I'm with you. I think there is always a potential for a team to just kind of come out of left field and really surprise the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that Raptors shout. I do think they've gone a little under the radar. Am I going to pick them in the first round? Probably not. But calling them the worst team in the playoffs, I think, is a little bit crazy. I
Yeah,
get it if you're just like looking at the roster. But I feel like if you've watched the Raptors a decent amount, you'd probably realize that's not true. And the defense has really impressed me. Obviously, heading into the year, it was clear that they had a lot of length and versatility, but I didn't expect the defense to be at this level. I think Scotty Barnes deserves just a ton of credit for his two-way impact. He's been super impressive. He's a guy I've always been a big fan of, but I've just loved what I've seen from him this season, and he's surprised me a little bit. I think he's probably in the mix for Defensive Player of the Year, at least for me at this point. And he's been incredible. And then Ingram as that scoring option as well has been fantastic. That duo has been really fun. I had questions about the fit, but they've proven me wrong. And that's another team where just I keep reevaluating my expectations for them throughout the season. So that a lot of fun. And I mean, who knows? You never know what can happen in the playoffs if the matchups break right for them. I could see them going on a run as well.
for sure. So now, for my third, I want to show the Western Conference a little bit of love, and I'm kind of putting OKC under the microscope. I really appreciate what OKC has been able to do these past 2 years. Nothing short of historic defense, amazing play from Shea, their big three. But I am a bit concerned about their half court offense. We've seen kind of in the past month or so, after that first loss to after that second loss to Minnesota, they really kind of looked out of it. And their half court offense isn't nearly as polished. And it's more about the process. Like, you're going to go on spells where you miss shots. It happens. It happens to the best of you, it happens to the worst of you. But sometimes they'll just get into modes where we don't see any ball reversals. We're not seeing any of the action and the motion in the half court that their offense really thrives on. And if you go back and look at their different matchups with San Antonio, their offense in the half court was always a predictor of how those games went. I think the times that they were very ISO heavy and Shea dependent, they ended up really struggling down the stretch because San Antonio was able to switch 1 through 4, and they're able to blitz, if they put the 5 man in the action, and OKC doesn't have the necessary playmakers on the backside of those actions to be able to capitalize on the numbers advantages. So, I'm a little concerned about them right now. I do want to give massive props to AJ Mitchell. I think he's had, when he's been healthy, an amazing year, and he's really showed people just how good he is. Nikola Topic coming back, it's going to take him a while to find his rhythm, to get in shape. He's not coming back on a team with no expectations. He's coming back on a team that many think will be in the NBA Finals. But if there's a way that they can get him up to speed quickly, I think his passing in the half court could be massive. Versus a team like Denver that likes to ice pick and rolls, flat hedge, do all of these things to really shrink the court. A guy that can manipulate help side defense, that can find skip passes, do more of those complex things, I think would make a big difference in that series. And, we saw it last year. They went to 7, and there were some nights where OKC just looked awful, and a simple zone really took them out of it. So I think a guy like Topic, the progression of an AJ Mitchell, might be able to stop some of those problems in the half court. But, it's all up in the air. Those aren't definitive things. So that's something I'm going to have my eye on.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. I mean, when you look at how the Thunder started, especially like up until like mid-December, really, it looked like
Hmm.
they were just this unbeatable team and they were gonna potentially win 70 plus games. And ever
Right.
since then, they just haven't been the same. And I definitely agree the half court offense and sort of the predictability there with Shea is a big factor, especially when you go against really good defenses. I think
Right.
that's something that could potentially get exploited in the playoffs. But yeah, I love the point about Topic. I feel like that could be a big difference maker for them. It's a lot to put on a guy in his really his first year in the league since he missed all of last season with the ACL injury, but I think he could be a difference maker, especially with that playmaking element he brings. And then another thing that has really concerned me with this Thunder's offense would be the lack of 3-point shooting. When you look at Caruso taking a step back from three, Dort taking a step back from three, Cason Wallace even taking a little bit of a step back from three. I think that's a big difference maker because, I mean, when teams, like you said, when they're blitzing Shea, when they're sending the house at him, if he doesn't have the shooters to knock it down, I feel like that's a real detriment. And I mean, another guy that I think could really change that would be Jared McCain. Not
Yes.
to say that the Thunder don't have any shooting. I mean, you look at like Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe. They're really good shooters, but just having that other shooter who's a dependable kickout option, I think is a really big benefit to this team potentially. And then also what he can do on the ball could really help them, giving them that other element. I do think the good thing for the Thunder is obviously they have the experience and they have the depth to sort of
Right.
make the most of this, but I do think we're going to have to see some changes from them. And I mean, throughout the year, always sort of been a little bit skeptical of the Thunder as this like team that's going to repeat. I had the Nuggets winning before the season. We'll see because the Nuggets are dealing with a ton of injuries too.
Yeah.
But I do think they are vulnerable in a way that we really haven't seen over the past like couple years. And then even going back to the playoffs, I guess. I do agree when when you look at them going to seven against Denver and you look at them going to seven against Indiana. Obviously, those were really good teams. At the same time, it does prove that they're sort of beatable in a playoff series, especially this year with them not looking as dominant. So I think it's going to be super interesting to see how this plays out. And yeah, do you have any thoughts on just like how the lack of shooting from some of these complementary players has like sort of hurt their offense as a whole?
For sure. You've seen teams just really shrink the floor. Teams are more comfortable icing Shea, bringing over early help to tag in the pick and roll. So if you take away Shea's ability to score and you take away his ability to hit the roll man, now you do have a numbers advantage, but it's like, okay, Lou Dort's left in the corner. We're not overly worried. And you go and look like, yes, we're talking more so coverages right now, but what's indicative of that is in big time matchups, certain guys' 3-point volume. Alex Caruso shot 12 threes on Christmas Day because they were so committed to leaving him wide open. If Shea's driving, it's kind of a no-no in the NBA to help one pass away off the strong side corner, but they were able and willing to put Wemby on him and say, hey, even if you drive right in front of Wemby, we're going to step off, we're going to help, we're going to shut off your driving lane, and we're going to force Alex Caruso to make threes. We're going to force Lou Dort to make threes. When they played Phoenix, and Phoenix ended up beating them in that Devin Booker, late time magic shot, they put Mark Williams on Lou Dort to start that game, and they were willing to rotate off of him. So I think you're seeing it a lot in the personnel. You're seeing it in the coverages that teams are willing to play. They simply aren't respecting the OKC shooters. And to me, it's amazing that somehow Shea is scoring at the most efficient clip in his career, despite teams throwing tougher coverages and he's having less relief around him. It shows how brilliant he is as a player. But, come playoff time, that's going to be really rough to do. And so I think you're seeing it across the board how that lack of shooting is affecting them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And I love the point about how effective Shea has been despite this. I do feel like, I mean, we don't have to talk a ton about awards, but I do feel like that bolsters his MVP case. And I feel like it's kind of a foregone conclusion as long as he stays healthy. And presumably, I don't expect Jokic to meet that 65 game threshold. I feel
Hmm.
like it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to be the MVP again, but it only really strengthens it because of last year he had a lot more relief. I think another factor would just be like Jalen Williams hasn't been healthy. And
Yes.
then Chet Holmgren hasn't necessarily taken that leap. Not that he's been a bad offensive player, but he hasn't totally taken that leap. So yeah, just super impressive from Shea. But I do agree that that lack of shooting and dependence on Shea could hurt them come playoff time. Then just two more quick points and questions with this Thunder team because I do think the number game is really important. And when you look at their 3-point defense, they're actually bottom five in 3-point defense. Despite having an elite defense, they do give up a lot of threes. So I feel like that's another reason to be concerned. Not only can they sort of uh, be penalized for their lack of shooting on the offensive end. But if you run into a team that can knock down a bunch of threes, they're definitely beatable because of the defense, actually, which is just fascinating because they obviously have a historically great defense. But that's been a big difference from last year. And then my other question for you would just be, other than the Spurs, who we have seen beat them several times this season, is there a team in the West that you think especially matches up well with this OKC squad?
I would say outside of San Antonio, I think the Timberwolves always match up pretty well with OKC, and we'll just start with them. For them, it's the physicality that they bring. Their motor is the key to a series with OKC because they can out rebound them. They can supersize the lineup, go like Jaden McDaniels, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert, or have Nas and Julius, and then Julius play the three. So they can supersize at any time and beat OKC up on the glass. We've seen OKC be susceptible to that in the Denver series, even at times versus Indiana. When they tried to go small, Indiana really pounded the glass, and Miles Turner, who's not known by any means as an elite rebounder, same for Pascal, were able to get on the glass and really work. So I think OKC is a bit vulnerable to Minnesota because of the lack of shooting compared to last year. And Anthony Edwards has taken another leap. Like, oh my goodness, that dude is amazing. For him to be shooting at the volume he does from three and be super efficient at it. Like no one was expecting that from him coming out of college. So he's really become one of the better three-point shooters in the league. His handle has improved, his playmaking has improved, and I think some of the constraints that we saw from him when facing that OKC defense last year may not altogether be there. He's become a bit better off the ball as well. So I think there's a possibility that he really gives OKC problems. So I would say Minnesota is a tougher matchup for them. I can't say Houston because they don't have a point guard, but if Houston did, it boils down to that physicality and size. They could really test them on the glass, and I think it would be a nice matchup. But I think my main pick is probably Minnesota.
Yeah, no, I'm happy you said that one. That was probably going to be where I went. And I'm happy you said that because I cover the Timberwolves and stuff. But you can definitely see, as someone who's watched literally every second of the Timberwolves this year, whenever they play OKC, like it's a little bit different for them.
Yeah.
They clearly don't want to get embarrassed like they did last time, and they're playing with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, which is really fun. And all of
Hmm.
those games have been amazing. They're 2-1
Yeah.
against them on the regular season series. But yeah, I definitely agree with the physicality point. If you look at teams that are like built to stop Shea, I feel like they're probably one of the better ones. Obviously, you have Rudy Gobert's rim protection, which is a huge factor, but then you also have Jaden McDaniels, who's one of the best point of attack defenders in the league. And I also
Right.
think getting Io DeSumo will really help, especially just having that extra ball handler, which they lacked throughout the season. I think that's going to be a massive advantage, especially against a team like OKC. I don't think they're like the perfect team to beat them necessarily. I do have certain concerns. I wouldn't necessarily pick them, but in terms of like giving them a headache and potentially pulling off an upset, they would be near the top of my list. I would have certain concerns. I mean, you look at last year, Gobert really performed poorly offensively, and I do feel like that could be a problem. And then likewise with Julius Randle, it's a tough matchup for him on the offensive end of the floor because they OKC themselves is very physical, and he had some issues with turnovers, shot selection, all that. But at the same time, if you can get the most out of Randall and Gobert, I think this is has a lot of upset potential. And then with their 3-point shooting, I think is another massive advantage because the Timberwolves have a ton of shooting, and that could really help them. And their 3-point defense is also really good. So I do think they are nicely positioned to potentially pull off an upset. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but I could see them near the top of the list. And then, yeah, the Rockets is an interesting one. Unless you have any closing thoughts on the Thunder, I think we can move ahead to them because that's actually one of the things I'm looking forward to.
No, I'm ready to move.
All right, cool. Yeah, so the Rockets, I feel like I love the point about the point guard because I think that's been a big problem for them throughout the season. And I'm really looking forward to just seeing how this clutch time offense potentially improves or maybe doesn't. I feel like that's been one of my favorite sort of niche things to follow throughout the season. And I mean, the Rockets in general, it hasn't been pretty leading up to the All Star break. I'll just say that. But in general, they're just one of my favorite teams to watch because they play with so much size. Their defense is still really fun. I love Kevin Durant. I
Yeah.
love Şengün. I love Amen Thompson. There's just so many guys on that team that I enjoy watching, and I love their style of play. But time and again, we've seen that this is not a good clutch time team. And it's really kind of baffling to me because you get Kevin Durant, who's supposed to be this closer, and he has played well in the clutch. However, they still haven't been able to improve from last year. And I'm shocked because I thought that would really solve a lot of their issues. I do think they're missing Fred VanVleet significantly. I think that's probably the biggest factor. But
Yes.
also that the two-man game between Durant and Şengün just hasn't totally been there this season, and it's been really puzzling. I do think, I mean, this is just more of like a simple stat, but it is kind of weird to me that Şengün is averaging more clutch time shots than Durant. I would try to maybe you can run stuff through Şengün as the hub and stuff like that, but you got Durant to be that go-to scorer, to be that
Yeah.
closer, and he's been amazing throughout the season. I just think they need to utilize him a little bit more in the clutch. And then I was specifically focusing on their clutch time offense. But another thing we've seen that I'm going to be watching closely is that teams, especially since that Steven Adams injury, are going at Şengün a lot more on the other end of the floor. They're picking him apart. His pick and roll defense hasn't totally been there. And I mean, Ime had a great quote a couple weeks before All-Star break where they asked him about that. He's like, "Yeah, it's been that way his entire career." And it was like, "Whoa, like that is crazy honesty." But also something to really watch, especially as we lead up to the playoffs when I would expect teams to employ that strategy a lot more. And at this point, I don't feel confident at all about this Rockets team being anything more than like a first or second round exit, especially in the West. In the East, it's a different story, but I think the West is just too talented, and I haven't loved how they've played recently. And I also don't understand why they didn't make a minor move at the deadline, even if it's getting a guy like Io. I felt like that would have been a nice move for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately, just in a really interesting spot. And I think the number one thing I'll be focusing on is that clutch time offense with the Rockets.
I love that pick of kind of putting Houston under the microscope, and they need to be there. There's so many questions. It's kind of hard to pick where to start, but I too, I'm a fan of Kevin Durant. I love Amin Thompson. I think he has so much potential. Same for Sengun. But in the half court, I've gone through and watched a lot of their games. It just looks so clunky. I think having a point guard in Fred VanVleet that could get everyone to their spots, could get them into sets more often, that would be super valuable. But you're getting a guy, you're running it through Sengun at times, you're running it through KD. Neither of them are traditional playmakers and have a point guard mindset. A point guard mindset is different than a playmaker mindset. Like, Sengun knows how to hit guys, knows how to get them open. Same for KD, but both of them are more turnover prone. They don't know, the ebbs and flows of an offense and when it is time to get certain guys involved, like a Fred VanVleet. So I think they are sorely, sorely missing him. And one of my other points is they got to take the training wheels off of Reed Shepard. I don't like how restrained he is at times and how he's not closing games. Josh Okogie has been excellent, giving them a ton of energy, shot the ball pretty well to start the season. But as we saw really with the entire roster, the first month was really, that wasn't indicative of who they really were. Tari Eason was shooting like 50% from three, and then Okogie was shooting well, Jabari Smith was shooting well. Sengun hit like 6 threes his first night out. So I think a lot of people thought like, oh, there's a legitimate shooting improvement. Not really. That wasn't sustainable by any means. It just happened very early in the season. So Reed needs to be in the game to close. Kevin Durant needs another spacer. Amin Thompson needs another spacer. Alperen Sengun needs another spacer. And I'm also a little bit disappointed with Udoka. I've always been a bit critical of him when it comes to building an offense. And I just, was talking about this the other day about how Boston literally went from seventh to a historic offense 2 years after he left under Joe Mazzulla. Once Joe Mazzulla had a full season with that squad, they turned into a historic unit. And it's not that Udoka should be penalized for not getting them there, but it's the fact that he leaves a lot on the margins. I think off ball, he lacks a lot of creativity that the league is pushing for. You see a lot of teams that have exchanges, flare screens, slips, 45 cuts, all of these things happening on the backside of a play that make it easier for your playmaker to find guys or puts the defense in kind of a pick your poison situation. And you just don't see that with Udoka. And a lot of times when it's clutch time, they're just handing the ball to Kevin Durant, isolate, like, yo, make something happen, bro. Same for Sengun, like, throw it to him at the elbow, make something happen. And everyone else is just standing around. So I don't think that's very conducive when you're playing in a conference like having San Antonio that can defend and has already an all-time great rim defender in Wemby and switchable guys. Same for OKC. Same for even a Denver that's very experienced and they know how to curve that athleticism gap. And like you mentioned with Steven Adams going down, their offensive rebounding was really propping the offense up. And so if you take that away, that means less layups, less kick out threes, and they're even more forced to operate in the half court. So I'd like to see them play a bit faster. I'd like to see Reed Shepherd really be inserted into the lineup and be made a focal point. And yeah, I agree with you. Last point I'll make is about the clutch time shots. Like, I love Sengun, but I don't think this is the time to be experimenting with him as a closer. You got Kevin Durant for that. You saw early in the season, closed out the Magic game, closed out the OKC game a couple of weeks ago. Like, there's been multiple points, the game versus Phoenix where he hit the game winner. Like, there's been a lot of points where he's been very successful in the clutch. Just for them the next night to go to Sengun, like, I don't get that. I don't get that. And I'm not a fan of kind of playing flip me with closer every other night. Your team needs to know who gets the ball in the clutch and how we respond to that. Having 10 games of knowing that Kevin Durant's going to get the ball, these are the coverages he's going to face, this is where I need to be, this is the shot I can expect, is so valuable once you get to the postseason, and it's something you've been through before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love those points that you brought up. I guess I'll first start off with Reed. I definitely agree that he needs to have a bigger role, especially late in these games. He's someone I definitely do have my doubts about. I don't know
Hmm.
if he's like that lead playmaker, that solution to their point guard problem necessarily. He can certainly help.
Hmm.
And then defensively, I think he could get targeted a little bit. He's a great defensive playmaker, but on the ball, I don't think he's all that great. At the same time, he's sort of better than what they got, especially playing with this like point guardless offense. And just like you said, simply floor spacing wise, I think it's really imperative that he plays big minutes. I think it does really hurt the team, especially in late games. Having two non-shooters there with Thompson and Şengün, I think that's a big problem, especially
Hmm.
come playoff time. That's another reason why I'm really concerned. And then some of their other forwards and wins aren't the best shooters either. So I think that's just another concern. And why not play Shepard if, I mean, one of your biggest problems is that 3-point shooting. And then with Ime, I think it's really interesting that you brought that up because I think heading into the year, he was a guy that was pretty consistently viewed as like a top five level coach. And I definitely enjoyed him in Boston. He had that magical 2022 season where
Hmm.
we turned it around and made a finals run and stuff like that. But I always sort of push back on this idea that he was a perfect coach by any means.
Yes.
I just needed to see it a little bit more. And he's kind of a weird coach. I do agree with some of the offensive stuff. He's just not like the most creative necessarily. I think that's a big problem. I mean, late in games, I do feel like it's sort of like your best players go create for yourself. I feel like that's common throughout the league. But I mean, throughout like the first like 43 minutes of a game, I'd like to see a little bit more structure there, especially with some of their struggles overall offensively. And the Steven Adams factor is huge because throughout most of the season, their best offense was when they would miss a shot and they get an offensive rebound. It was super cool. It was super unique. It was a lot of fun to watch. However, that was always flawed, even if Adams didn't get hurt.
Hmm.
So yeah, I do think there is some reasonable concerns with Ime, and I have seen Rockets fans sort of turning on him a little bit, which is kind of crazy. I personally would just, no matter what happens, even if you kind of embarrass yourself in the first round, I would keep him around. I still think he's a
Yeah.
good coach.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think he has moved himself down from like an elite top five level coach in the league to that next tier of guys, in my opinion. And I also think it's kind of interesting with Ime in general. He was hired back in 2021, so you sort of view him as like that modern coach. But what we're seeing from a lot of these guys that have came in since is more of that offensive creativity side. I mean, whether it be like a Jordan Ott, a Joe Mazzulla, there's like numerous guys, Charles Lee, that you can just list off, and he doesn't totally have that. He's more of that like old school coach, and I think there's
Yeah.
a lot of benefits to that. You
Mhm.
look at how quickly the Rockets turned around under him. Obviously, they had some moves, but Ime played a big part in that. But when it gets to a situation where you need to, have some more creativity in the offense, I do think that style can sort of hold you back in some ways. I mean, to a lesser extent, I think Chris Finch has some of the same problems that Ime does. I feel like they're
Yes.
similar coaches in some ways.
Yeah, I love that comparison. I think once again, you look at Minnesota and their viability in these big playoff series is that, oh, we can defend and we can rebound. And on the offensive end, like, hey, we got Anthony Edwards, and take it or leave it, and that's what we got. So I love that comparison, and I think, yeah, we're seeing that, and it's ironic that I think a couple of guys off of his coaching tree in 2022 have gone on to be like really creative offensive minds. I know the Jazz have struggled for a while now, but Will Hardy was a part of that coaching staff, and I think he's a great offensive mind. He's developed Keontae George, unlocked Lauri Markkanen, and then we obviously saw Joe Mazzulla and what he's been able to do, take Boston historic heights, and with Tatum, without Tatum, still keep this team as a contender in the East. So yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. I was looking at the assistant coaching tree the other day, and I was like, there's some very interesting names that came out from under Udoka.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point. I mean, Hardy's super underrated. We talked about Missoula earlier, but yeah, Hardy's very underrated, and I don't feel like the average fan knows just how good of a coach he is, because he's
Right.
stuck in this weird Utah Jazz team. I think next year people will finally start to realize.
Yes.
That's a story for a different day. I think I could move on to my third one because I'm a little bit behind right now, but you brought up the Celtics. I think that's a nice transition. To talking about Jayson Tatum's return, and this is where I may turn into a biased Celtics fan, so please feel
Go
free to
for
call me out.
it.
But I do think objectively, this is one of the more interesting, if not the most interesting story post All Star break. Is this idea that Jayson Tatum could return to a team that's already a top three seed in the East and has looked amazing without him. And I think it's probably the biggest swing factor in any team's title chances around the league. What level of play Tatum will return at, or if he will return at all, because that's not 100% confirmed. It looks like he's going to return. I would bet money that he's going to return, but it's not a certainty yet. And I do think, I mean, in terms of like him fitting in, I think it's going to be pretty seamless. I know there's some conversation. Oh, this is now like Jaylen Brown's team, whatever. I feel like the system has always ran through the Jays. It's been the Jays.
Yes.
It's not been, oh, it's ran through Tatum and then sometimes Brown. I mean, you look at Jaylen Brown winning the Finals MVP and the Eastern Conference Finals MVP rather. I think that sort of proves this has been a system around the Jays. And yeah, maybe Tatum will take a little bit of a lesser usage role coming off the Achilles injury. I don't think there's any harm in that, and Brown's been amazing, so I think it will really work perfectly. But yeah, just in terms of like seeing Jayson Tatum play basketball again as a Celtics fan, and I'm sure just even as a neutral NBA fan, it's super exciting to watch. I am nervous seeing him come back from such a serious injury so soon. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna lie. But at the same time, I do trust the Celtics medical staff, and I trust Tatum to make the right decision for him. And we have seen guys return from this injury relatively soon. Obviously, like Kobe's the big example. He did have another injury after that. But even like a Drew Smith, I think he returned 9, 10 months after that. Not a household name by any means, but it does prove that this can be done. And I do trust the Celtics, like I said, to make the smart decision. Um, and then, yeah, just in general, like if Tatum comes back, even if he's not top five level player in the world like he has been in the past, if he's just like an all-star level player, which I feel confident that he could be, based on the fact that he contributes just so much all around, not just as a scorer, not relying on his athleticism. This Celtics team could end up being my pick to come out of the East, and I've I never thought I would say that before the season. I'll just put it that way. I've continued to reevaluate my expectations for this team, and it's been kind of a roller coaster season in that way, but it's been a super fun season because this team has just exceeded any and all of my expectations. Even though I was like relatively positive on them, I thought they would be a playing team. So yeah, just super excited to see how this whole Tatum situation plays out.
I think you made a phenomenal point about the offense running through the Jays, and that's why I am so high on Joe Mazzulla, because it's not easy to create an offense that has balance for two star level players. Typically, there's always going to be a hierarchy. And I mean, to a degree, I guess you could say it if you look at like counting stats. But even last year, to your point, Jaylen Brown won finals MVP. And he was elite versus Indiana in the Eastern Conference Finals. It's more of a we're rolling with whoever's hot, and we're rolling and we're working through you, because a lot of the same things that they do for Brown, they do for Tatum. And I think he's done a masterful job making target ball like a mainstream offense, and the advantage creation that they're able to do. It'll be the simplest actions, but if you're playing 4 out 1 in and we have a flare screen and you can't help off of anyone, okay, either you have to switch or like Tatum's gonna wrap this all the way around to the rim. So there's so many things you have to be concerned about. And that's, once again, all credit to Mazzulla. He's an amazing offensive mind. But I would love to see Tatum come back, and it throws a wrench in everyone's plans. If I'm Detroit, that has me scared. You know, we've played multiple times, and it's like, okay, we've gotten a win or two. I'm not sure exactly what their season series is. I remember watching most of those games, most recently the one in Detroit, but those games have been close and they've been dogfights. So you're telling me all of a sudden we have to add in a guy that can get 28, 30 a night and hit pull up threes, do all these different things? Like, whoa, that's not fun. And the thing is, even if he comes back on a minutes restriction, he can still rebound. He's a very good rebounder as a wing or, forward, depending on what you put him as. He can play make, he can pass, he can play off the ball, he can catch and shoot, he knows how to cut. And I think there's a chance we see a similar thing like we did with KD. Having time, like almost in the prime of your career, to stop, evaluate your game, and work on different things. It's like, oh, okay, I can come back. And Kevin Durant was more efficient as a three-point shooter after his Achilles tear than he was before. And I think there's a chance that we see Tatum maybe even out the mid-range a little bit, become really nice in the post. And those were things he was already improving on, but having a whole year away to skill develop and see where you're not as sharp at, for a guy his age, that's really terrifying. So I'm very intrigued on what his comeback looks like. And I think ultimately, man, it sets up an incredible Eastern Conference next year. Like you said, the league just misses Halliburton and misses Tatum. And you get both of those guys healthy, you get their teams healthy, and now you throw a Detroit team that doesn't look like they're going to be moved in the mix. The East is going to be, it's going to be a dog fight next year.
Yeah, most definitely. I really love those points. I mean, first, I guess starting with like Tatum being able to sit back and watch, I think that's a great point that I hadn't totally thought of. But like you said with KD and really other players, even if it's like a minor injury, having that time away and just sort of watching how you fit in, especially with so many new pieces, I do feel like that could be very beneficial. And I could maybe see, like you said, like his shot selection getting a little bit better. Maybe he becomes more of like a dependable spot up shooter, especially if they are going to run just a little bit more through Brown. I think there's a lot of intriguing things that could happen there. And then, yeah, Joe Mazzulla, I just got to give him some credit because I feel like this, I mean, he's probably got to win Coach of the Year at this point. He's been incredible. I feel like when you look at the consensus view of him in 2022 when he or 2022 2023 that season when he first started coaching 3 years ago to where we are now, it's been a complete 360. And he, like you said, he is just a complete offensive mastermind. I do feel like just the general discourse around the Celtics offense, it's not understood even by certain Celtics fans. And I don't mean this like as a disrespectful thing, but like I will say, even me personally, back in like 2023, I was like, are they shooting a little bit too much threes? I'd like to see a little bit more of like the ability to generate rim pressure, stuff like that. But like you said, it comes down to advantage creation and finding a matchup. And I feel like I was saying earlier, with the way they run things through the Jays, it's because it's matchup dependent, sort of like you were saying as well. If Jalen has the better matchup, they're going to go to him more. If Jayson has the better matchup, they're going to go to him more. And finding ways to exploit matchups is really what they do best. And they create open shots like no team in the league, in my opinion. Yeah, obviously a lot of them are from three, which people sometimes don't like it. Sure, can they get a little trigger happy from three, whatever. At the same time, it works the majority of the time. And it's been a proven system, and the system, I feel like, without a shadow of a doubt this season, it's worked, and it's worked to a degree that I don't think anybody could have ever imagined. And Missoula deserves a ton of credit. And then even like some of his defensive stuff is really fun. And like you mentioned, Tatum's rebounding, which will be a huge part of his impact when he returns. But just how well they've been able to rebound and maintain a high level top 10 defense without Tatum has been really incredible and a bit surprising to me. So yeah, I mean, Missoula just deserves all the credit in the world for what he's done.
100%. And if do you have anything else on the Celtics?
No, I think we can move ahead if you're ready.
Okay, so actually for my fourth, I have a familiar foe of theirs, and it's the Orlando Magic, and I'm very interested. They've just been a roller coaster this year. I almost said dumpster fire, but like it's just been such an odd year to observe Orlando. I thought going into the season, you finally get your true point guard, like we talked about with Houston. It's like this really dysfunctional half court offense led by Paolo. Now, okay, we have a point guard that can get Franz and Paolo to their spots, hopefully get them open, get them easier looks. They should both be better, more efficient. Tyus Jones falls out of the lineup fairly quickly. Okay, wasn't expecting that. Desmond Bain steps in, is doing a really, really good job, exactly what you thought he would bring. But now, all of a sudden, the defense takes a massive step back. You go from being top five to like 14th. And now, like, people are calling for Paolo's head in Orlando. And I was just like, whoa, okay, I understand like the PB and OJ. It is kind of funny. I think the nickname is funny. However, like some of the lengths people have gone to talking about this guy in the past couple of weeks, I'm like, that's crazy. Like people are talking about him next to Zachary Risachet and calling him a bust. I'm like, whoa. There's nothing that justifies that. I don't care if you are a film focused person, a stats focused person, to call him a bust or say that he's been a disappointment in the league is nothing short of crazy. As a Boston fan, I know you remember watching what he was able to do last postseason against a team that had Drew Holiday, Al Horford, Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, like five plus switchable guys that are dependent defenders that you could throw at him. And he was averaging like 30, an efficient 30, while no one else on that offense was really doing much of anything, including Franz Wagner. So it's just very disappointing to see people have no grace for him in this year when he's been injured, been in and out of the lineup. Franz has been in and out of the lineup. They still don't really have a true point guard because Tice didn't really work for them defensively, but they're 14th defensively even when he's not playing. So I kind of wonder, like, maybe it's worth it to see what he can do for you in the half court. But, even then, their shooting is still abysmal. Outside of Desmond Bain, you don't really have a guy that you can trust to knock down a shot when he's called on. So, I don't know with them. It's very odd. Franz is going to be out for a while. They just announced that. So, I'm really hoping we can see some great Paolo hoops down the stretch. And as he did with Cleveland, as he did versus Boston, I hope people just get that reminder that, like, hey, not only is this young guy like amazing, he when he has it going and when he figures it out, like I think he's amongst one of the best young players in the league. A walking mismatch, can pass with the best of them. He's just having to play all these different roles this season, and that's not to take accountability off his shoulders. The turnovers are a problem. He needs to be more efficient as a jump shooter, needs to be better off the ball. I don't want to sit here and make it sound like he's this perfect guy where everything around him is failing him. He's creating some of the issues, and he needs to be better. They've talked about him being disengaged and not being on the same page as Jamal Mosley. It seems pretty evident when you watch. So he's not blameless at all, and I don't want to make it seem like that. I think some people think I have that stance. That's not the stance I take. But it would be criminal to act as if this is close to an optimal situation. Like he's dragged this team out of obscurity and helped bring them back to a consistent playoff team. And it's a shame that like just 50 games can get people completely out on this guy and calling him a bust when his career averages are like 23-8 and he was just all NBA level a year ago. So I am gonna have eyes on Orlando, seeing what they can do the last half of the season, and if they can sneak into the postseason, and ultimately if Paolo can have another one of those very impressive series. I don't bank on them winning. I don't see them beating anyone in the Upper East, but just how far can Paolo take it?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, I really agree with all those points. The Magic were a team that I was super high on, especially with that Bane acquisition. And if you had told me that Anthony Black is having the season that he's been having, I would have
Right.
said, okay, are the Magic like the one seed or something? What is going
Right.
on? He's really impressed me this season. But yeah, it's been a incredible disappointment. The offensive struggles are really concerning. I do think we do need to have like a Jamal Mosley conversation. If I had to put my money on one coach that's going to get fired, it would unfortunately be Mosley. Like you said, the disconnects there. I do think his offensive creativity could be better. I would say, and then defensively, it is kind of weird. I can't totally put my finger on it, to be honest with you, why they've declined so much. They have the personnel to be an elite defense. We've seen it the past few years, but I agree that's a major underrated talking point of the season. And then, yeah, it's really disappointing to see that Franz is going to be out for another few weeks because I was really hoping and looking forward to seeing Franz and Paulo trying to work this out. I do still have this is a team like I just refuse to give up belief on
Yeah.
as a team
Yeah.
and Paulo. It's just like it just makes so much sense on paper, I would say, especially with the leap from Anthony Black and then Jalen Suggs when he's on the court, he's legitimately one of the most important players in the league. And then you get the shooting with Maine. I don't know. There's just so much I like about this team and how good they played in the playoffs. I know they lost to the Celtics in 5 games, but that felt like a 7 game series to me, honestly. And then they took the Cavs to 7 the year before. And yeah, I say all that without talking about Paulo a lot because I do have a lot of thoughts, and I am pretty aligned with you on this one. I think there's like a big difference between saying that like Paulo has had a bad season. There's no way around that. It's been a
Yeah.
down season. It's been disappointing to me as a Paulo fan. There's a big difference between saying that and sure, reevaluate your expectations for him as a player, right? Move him down your player rankings, whatever. I get that. There's a big difference between saying that and oh, this guy's a bust. This guy's no longer a top 50 player in the league. That's just insane to me, given what we've seen from this guy in the playoffs. Like you said, incredible in that Celtic series, unreal in that Cavs series as well. And I just refuse to give up on him. I mean, there is like shot selection. I feel like is the biggest thing for me. It's like that's got to get better. Shot selection, decision making, just absolutely has to get better. But I mean, here's a guy who's in his what third year in the league. I mean, fourth year in the league maybe. I know 2022. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I just refuse to give up on him, and he's just so talented. Is he maybe going to be like a top 10 player in the league in his prime? I don't know, but I think he's going to be still like a multi-time All-Star,
Yeah.
All-NBA guy. I expect him to bounce back for the rest of the season. Maybe that's me being a little too overly optimistic. And then in the big picture, with potentially some roster changes as well as a coaching change like we discussed, I have a lot of confidence in him long term still. So I feel like that's just such an important distinction to say. Yes, Paulo hasn't been very good this season. He's been disappointing, but no, he's not a draft bust. I think that's just unreal. I don't know how people come to these conclusions, other than frankly like engagement bait. And I do think like this is a whole nother conversation that I don't want to get like too deep into because we could probably sit here and talk about it for like an hour. But like
Yeah.
the overemphasis on analytics is like a little bit harmful. I love analytics. I use them a lot. But I think it's important to use them to like back up what you're seeing from the eye test and not just saying, "Hey, let's talk about basketball on a spreadsheet." And I think that's what a lot of people do with Paulo.
Yes, and like you said, we could talk about this legitimately for hours, but I'll spare you the rant. I will say, however, the number one thing I hear every single time I've made a video about Paolo or I've talked about Paolo, he has a negative on off for the past 3 years. Okay, all right, I got you. Now, he has a negative on off. Cool. Take him off the court. Let's take him off the Magic. Or are they a playoff team? Are they a playoff team each of the past 3 years? I don't think so. Do they get a game off of the Celtics? No. Do they get a game off the Cavs the year before without him? No. Like you said, nothing short of phenomenal. And also, like, there is context to be given with on off, because you have to realize certain lineups are slanted, and with him being the number one, like, most times he's playing with the worst available offensive guys that they have left, and that Franz is typically playing with the better offensively slanted lineups. And so, I guess there is something to be said about that. But is that enough to justify him not being, like you said, a top 50 player? Absolutely not. Is that enough to justify Orlando moving on from him? I feel like you'd be crazy to do that as quick as people were talking about it. So I'm with you 1,000%. And one day, actually, I hope we have that conversation, because there's a lot of analytical takes that really, really get me going as far as basketball discourse goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a great podcast, especially like with the draft. I feel like that's an interesting place to like use analytics. I certainly do. But I also try not to overly rely on them. And I think the on off numbers point is just crucial, because I do agree that's what I see a lot with this Paulo discourse, as well as like true shooting efficiency and stuff like that. I get it, it hasn't been good. But yeah, the context with the on off numbers, like you said, is important. And just another guy who popped into my head when you were talking about it, we already talked about him, but do you know who else has a negative on-off swing? Jaylen Brown. But you'd be a fool to argue that he's not playing at a first-team All-NBA level this season, you know?
Right.
And you'd be a fool to say that the Celtics would be anywhere close to where they are without Jaylen Brown. So
Exactly.
I do feel like that context kind of gets lost. I get how it can be important and you can use it for certain things. Like, if you're talking about the best of the best, if you're talking about, I don't know, I'd like a defensive player of the year conversation was one for me last year, where it was like, it is something to me where Dyson Daniels, or where the Hawks are actually worse with Dyson Daniels on the floor defensively. Obviously, there's context, but I was like, that does in some ways prevent me from putting him like number one on my depoy ladder or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
But I would never sit here and say, oh, well, he's a bad defender, flat out.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of context there, and I feel like Paulo's like the prime example of that.
100%.
All right. I think I can move on to my next one. We can stay in the East for this one. We already kind of talked about this team a little bit, so we probably don't have to go like as in depth. And it was kind of similar to what you said earlier about like Eastern Conference teams separating themselves. I have the Pistons chase for 60 wins. Right now they're at 40-13, which first off, nobody would have expected heading into the year. But second off, that does put them in a nice position to potentially get that 60 win mark. Kind of an arbitrary mark, but I do think it's like kind of interesting to think about if this Pistons team wins 60 games and if they're sort of like 7 games ahead of the 2 seed, would they be the consensus favorites? What more do they have to show really? And then also like the ability to potentially finish with the best record in the league is something I'd like to know.
Yeah.
Because right now they're slightly, just ever so slightly, ahead of the Thunder in terms of winning percentage. Thunder have played a little bit more games, but that's besides the point. Ultimately, I guess with the Pistons, since we already sort of talked about like teams separating themselves in the East, how concerned with like that lack of 3-point shooting and secondary shot creation next to Cade are you? And is there anything else that like holds you back from them being your clear favorite?
I am a little bit concerned about the secondary shot creation and playmaking, because ideally that was going to be Jaden Ivey, right? That was who we were anticipating to step into that role. But then he has that really horrific injury last year, taking him forever to come back, not looking quite the same. They get rid of him, and now you got Karis LeVert, you got Dennis Jenkins off the bench, but are we trusting those guys to lead a second unit? I think something that was fairly under discussed last year was the role that Dennis Schroeder played for them off the bench. He was really good defensively, but offensively, he got them to their spots. He could shoot the ball when needed, run a pick and roll, keep that same, to a lesser degree version of a Cade for the bench unit. So I'm just I am a little concerned about it, because I don't see where that piece is going to come in. I'm not sure if I trust Karis LeVert to be that guy or Dennis Jenkins to be that guy. So that's my biggest concern for them. I still believe in them a lot, to the point that you made, to go from being the laughing stock of the league 2 years ago with the running, longest losing streak in NBA history. Like, they were getting edits, losing edits on TikTok on a daily basis. to go from that to potentially having the best record in the league, salute to Cade Cunningham, the development of Jalen Duren, JB Bickerstaff. Like, I thought, after Cleveland, it was like, okay, if you didn't prove yourself with the roster that they had, I was a little concerned, but he's done amazing work in Detroit. And they just have this very 90s reminiscent basketball team. You got your one shooter, you got a bunch of hard-nosed defenders, Ron Holland and Asur Thompson. I'm very excited to see if Asur Thompson, him versus any number one in the postseason. I think that's going to be fun. It's going to be a cat and mouse game. And then you've got Ron Holland that can switch on and just really terrorize these guys. And really Cade is just a fantastic number one. And so I'm very excited to see, what he looks like in the postseason. But they need a shooter. And so we'll see how Kevin Huerter adjusts after the trade deadline. You've got Duncan Robinson. But I'm a bit concerned if anyone could step in and relieve Cade of the pressure, and if teams just completely shrink the floor and force the others to knock down shots and win a series.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I like the point, especially about like Schroeder. I feel like he was just an underrated part of that team, and then losing Ivy is tough. And obviously, he didn't have the best season or anything, but it is tough not to have that development out of him. And injuries certainly played a role. I wish him the best in Chicago. I'm still high on him overall. But yeah, I mean, this team is just such a throwback team, like you said, and it fits so perfectly with their past identities, whether it be the '04 Pistons and then obviously like the '80s bad boy Pistons. In general, Cade's incredible. I think he deserves to be in a legit MVP conversation this year, especially just his importance to this team. So I do feel like, especially like with some of the strides he's made as a decision maker, coming back on those turnovers, I do feel like decent about like, okay, maybe they don't have the most ball handling around him, but it's Cade. He's gonna be fine. And in the playoffs, they didn't beat the Knicks last year, but they looked good. Generally, it's still a big leap to make from going to like looking good in a first round series to making the NBA Finals. But yeah, overall, I think it's hard not to be optimistic about this team, and just in general, they're super fun to watch. I will say though, I would have preferred that they sort of went maybe not like a totally all in move where you trade all your picks or whatever. But I would have liked to see them make some sort of move at the deadline. Michael Porter Jr. was the guy I always wanted them to get. Maybe he just wasn't available, and the Nets really wanted to hold on to him. That's fine, but I feel like just that type of player to have as that secondary shot creator as well as his elite 3-point shooting, I think would have been massive, and that would have made the difference for me. And in a wide open Eastern Conference, I would have preferred that they just took advantage of that. Or even getting a guy like Kobe White, when I saw the price he went for, I thought that would have been a nice pickup for them. I get it, he doesn't totally fit into their defensive identity, but I feel like what he brings to the offensive side of the ball would have been a big enough advantage for them to make a move like that. But regardless, it's hard not to feel good about them at least. And I also, real quick, I love the Sarr point because he can just take players out of the game like no other. And they just have so many great defenders like that. Isaiah Stewart's another one.
Yeah.
Duren has really stepped up as a rim protector. And obviously the offensive leap is the big story, but that's another area that I've been impressed with him as. So yeah, I mean, really fun team. Looking forward to seeing how the rest of the season plays out for them.
For sure. And, for my last point, I think Jalen Duren is a guy that kind of falls in the last topic I want to cover, which is the most improved player race. Duren went from just a very good athlete that rim runs, can grab rebounds, to this well-rounded offensive center that can put the ball on the deck, has a bit of a face-up game, has a bit of a post game. He's not necessarily elite at any one thing yet, but he can dip his hand in everything and still be a very high-level roller. So I've just been thoroughly impressed with him, and that's not to mention the defensive jump. He's come a long way defending the pick and roll, defending the rim. So he's one of the guys that I'm looking at. To me, Ryan Rollins deserves so much credit for Milwaukee. He stepped in and kind of been that consistent hand for a team that has been through trade rumors, roster changes, Giannis in and out, like just a roller coaster of a year for the Milwaukee Bucks. But Rollins has been a steady hand at the guard spot. Got off to a really hot start, was scoring really well. He gave the Warriors 30. I'll always remember that. Like, that was a really awesome performance from him. So, I think he deserves the award, like the essence of the award. I think sometimes we look at certain guys and it was like, oh, okay, he was a fringe all star, but he made the all star leap, and we're gonna give him the award. Rollins legitimately went from being last in the rotation and sneaking into their playoff rotation because Dame got hurt to all of a sudden being their starting point guard and averaging double digits, being a very good defender, being a playmaker. Like that to me is what the most improved player is all about. But you still have guys like Denny Avdia that made a pretty sizable jump this year. Jalen Duren made a jump. Jalen Johnson went from like, you're more of like cool in theory, you're cool in idea and concept, to like, oh my goodness, you're a walking triple double threat, and you can almost at any time create a mismatch or create a good look for your offense. And they obviously have some work to do building around him, but yeah, those are kind of the core grouping of guys I'm looking at. But as of right now, I'd have to say my favorite is Ryan Rollins for the award.
Yeah, this is such a great one because the most improved award is always a lot of fun. I do feel
Hmm.
like sometimes, like you said, they kind of lose the plot. It's like this was like 3 or 4 years ago, but like when John Morant won it, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
What are we doing here? But
Right.
I feel like this year, regardless of who it goes to, unless they just hand it to someone like, wait, what?
Hmm.
But like of the main guys that seem to be in contention for this award, I feel like it will be deserving. I don't know who my favorite would be necessarily, but in general, I do agree. Like guys like Ryan Rollins is what this award is all about. Going from a two-way contract to being a legit contributor on a Bucks team, probably their second or third best player. I know the Bucks haven't been great, but that's a massive leap, and there's no denying that. Another guy I'd like to shout out in that similar vein would be Colin Gillespie. He's been incredible for the Suns
Yes.
this year. Um,
Yes.
and those are just like personally, and I'm sure you'd agree, like some of my favorite stories to see where it's like these guys are legitimately barely in the league, and then that you see some flashes. We saw that with both Gillespie and Rollins last year, where it's like, oh, maybe this could be something. Then it's like, whoa, this is like legitimately something. And it's really cool to see, and yeah, just I love stories like that. And then, like you said, two guys who legit became all stars with Denny and Duren, I feel like is incredible. Duren for me would be the one that's surprised me a little bit more. I've always been sort of the Denny fan club as a basketball player. I really like his game. Just what he brings to the table is like that jack of all tools kind of guy. I've always been high
Hmm.
on him since those Washington days. And I'm happy to see this leap he's made. It's been really incredible. At the same time, I do feel like we saw a little bit more flashes than a guy like Duren. Duren, for me, if you had asked me my opinion on him in September, I would be like, Jalen Duren, he's all right. He's fine.
Yeah.
I would have been like all star ever. No, and I also feel like just going back to like where I was at in September, I feel like I was underrated in just how young he was. So maybe I shouldn't be this surprised by his growth, but it's been amazing that he's been blossomed into a legit all star, legit like I don't know top 30 guy in the league or whatever. And then the other guy I'd like to shout out, sort of the same vein where it's like Keontae George. Yeah, he's all right, decent young player, decent scorer.
Yeah, I left him off.
I mean, there's so many guys. I feel like I'm leaving like four or five guys off. These are just names that are coming to mind. But Keontae's been incredible, and I feel like what I've been impressed with is both like the playmaking and defense leap that he's made. Am I
Hmm.
here to say that he's all of a sudden an above average defender? No, but he has gone from the worst defensive player in the league probably to
Yeah.
a competent defender, maybe like slightly net neutral, whatever. That's impressed me, and then the playmaking and decision making leap he's made on top of obviously leveling up as a scorer, which I always thought there was a way for him to do that, but I always saw him more in that mold of like a Anthony Simons, Colin Sexton type of player instead
Right.
of what we're seeing from him, which is already a borderline all star and still plenty of room to grow given his age.
100%. Yeah, that was a great point, man. I left Keontae out, but he's taken a massive leap, and it's been so fun to watch. Like you said, I think teams are gonna really get a chance to see Utah in a new light next year. The supersized lineup that they could roll out, and you got it's like 6'9" Ace Bailey that could be playing the two next to Keontae, and all of a sudden, like that's a very dangerous looking roster. So yeah, I love that point.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm excited to see Utah next year. Finally pushing forward, trying to have a good team. I think they could be a legitimate, not just playing team, but a legitimate playoff team. Sneaky potential. We'll see how that
Mhm.
plays out in the next year or so. But I guess we
Yeah.
can close things out with my last one, and that will just be how much will James Harden elevate this Cavaliers squad? We already saw it in a couple games. I think they were 2-0 or 3-0 in his first few games with the team pre All Star break. They've built some momentum even slightly before trading for him, and they're up to fourth in the East after being like in the play-in for some of the season. So that's interesting. And then I don't want to just make this solely about Harden, although he's like the biggest factor here. But also getting Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder, I think, is huge for this team. Ellis another like 3-and-D win, and then Schroeder that ball handler off the bench that they've lacked since losing Ty Jerome. I feel like is going to be massive for this team. But Harden, I think specifically given the Cavs' struggles in the clutch and just how much responsibility Mitchell has had, I think that will be crucial for them. And then how we can elevate this big man duo of Jared Allen and Evan Mobley will be huge. I love Darius Garland. I like the trade for the Clippers a lot, but at the same time, Harden is a better playmaker, and we already
Hmm.
saw it with Jared Allen. He was averaging like 25 something 25 28 points after they traded for Harden. Obviously, it's a super small sample size, but I feel like he's the perfect center for Harden, and Harden's the perfect guard for him. And then Mobley
Yes.
has been injured, but he is set to return soon. And I feel like Harden could potentially give us this Mobley leap that we've been waiting for the past few years. And I'm excited to see maybe Mobley develop a little bit as a shooter. He's kind of taken a step back, but if he can get back to where he was as a shooter last year, I think that would be huge. And I think Harden can just help this team in so many ways, especially like in the clutch. Am I skeptical about like his playoff track record? Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I am. But at the same time, in the regular season, I could totally see this team climbing up to maybe being like the top two seed that everyone thought they would be before the season. And Harden will obviously be a massive factor there.
Yeah, I love that point. I think in kind of every way and in small ways, James Harden is just like the better, bigger version of Darius Garland, you know? And although he's not the greatest defender by any means, we all know that, he's just stronger and he's physically bigger. So it makes it a bit more difficult to go at him in the same way that you do go at a Darius Garland. And as a Celtics fan, you know, like he's been at the top of that target list for some years now. So I like it. It brings him more size. It brings them a even stronger element of pick and roll play. Like you said, Allen has been amazing in the couple of games we've seen him next to Harden. But that's what Harden's done at every stop. You know, he made Capella look like an All NBA type center, made Zubats look phenomenal, and I think he's going to do the same thing with Jared Allen. He'll do the same thing with Mobley. And like you said, if we can see Mobley really reestablish himself offensively, kind of at the level that he was at last year, I would be very confident in this team just because you don't need Harden to score then. You know, you've got Donovan Mitchell. His numbers always typically rise in the postseason. And then if Mobley can be that second go to scoring option, and we can look at Harden as the third, and it's like, I really want you to play make first, and if you need to score, like go score. You know, just read the game and play basketball how James Harden does it. If you can get that out of them, like, hey, that might be a formula for success. And you could look at a postseason where Jared Allen, instead of getting 12 to 15, he's closer to 15 to 18, you know, just because of his ability to play off the roll next to James. So I like it. I like it a lot. I think it's probably the best move that they could have made. It's slightly lateral because you're working with the same archetype of player, but there are some obvious gains in having James Harden on that roster. But the real thing, I think you hit the nail on the head. I love them getting Dennis Schroeder and Keon Ellis. Lonzo Ball wasn't what they wanted, and I think Lonzo Ball doesn't. He's not aggressive enough as a scorer to unlock the playmaking abilities that he has. So you have a guy in Dennis Schroeder who can still go and get you 20, but he can play make, get guys open, get guys to their spot. Still a very solid defender, even at this stage in his career. And Keon Ellis is just a game wrecker on that end. You know, is always able to turn you over, jumpstart your fast break offense, and that should lead to easier buckets for all of the big four that they have. So I like it. I like it a lot. You know, am I confident enough to say like, hey, they're the second best team or potentially the best team in the East? No, not yet. You know, I'd like to see more. And first playoff series for them is going to be very telling. But they're a team that I do have some hope in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the size factor with Harden's huge, and I mean, just going from like a guy that's like 6'5". I don't know how much Harden weighs, but he weighs a lot more than Darius Garland, who's like
Yeah.
6'1", 6'2", and
Mhm.
yeah, and he's also healthier. I think that's another factor. So even though I did personally have some of my doubts, when the trade was first made, as time has gone on, I've kind of talked myself into it, and then, like you said, if they can just have him be that third option, purely not purely focused on playmaking, but mainly focused on playmaking in a playoff setting, I think that could be huge. And you look at just like the top three guys, I feel like they might have the best top three in the East, up there with the
Totally.
Knicks. But yeah, I think we can move on to some questions from the audience if you're ready for that.
But yeah, let's do it.
All right, so we got 5 questions here. Shouldn't take too much time, but yeah, we let's start over on Instagram. Got a couple questions about the All Star game, so we can start there. Um, my boy Charlie Bishkoff wants to know, how do we solve stars sitting out in the All Star game? Should they just not allowed to participate, or do you have like another solution in mind?
Hmm. Not sitting out the All Star break is tough. We have a hard enough time getting guys to play NBA games, let alone the All Star break. But I do believe that potentially a model of East versus West and home court advantage, like in the finals, could be very beneficial. If we're looking at the league right now and the current state that it's in and the collective bargaining agreement, I think the day of one ruling superpower for like 5 straight years is just very unlikely. With injuries and roster building, it's so difficult to stack stars and have a complementary enough team around them to win. I just don't see it. So I think, possibly setting it up to where the winning conference gets home court advantage. You look at the East, we just talked about Detroit, Cleveland, New York. I feel like I'm missing one, but even then, you've got multiple teams that could legit make a run and represent the East in the finals. So all those guys are going to be playing hard, and all those guys are going to have a vested interest in making sure they win. Even in the West, you've got OKC, Denver, San Antonio as the upper tier for sure, but then you've got teams on the outskirts like Houston, Minnesota. So you've got multiple teams that either believe or could trick themselves into believing that they have a shot at making the NBA finals. So all of those guys now have a real reason to get up, suit up and play. And so that's one thing I'd be interested to see if the league rolls out.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting one. I feel like that's been tossed around. I think my sort of issue with that is in a scenario where like a Miami Heat team goes on a crazy run and they somehow have home court advantage in the finals as an 8 seed, or the Pacers. That just doesn't seem right to me in an exhibition game. Personally, my stance on this is like, you know what? I actually don't really care. Like if these stars aren't played in the All Star game, that's more of my thing. I think the All Star game. We have another question, so it's kind of on a similar note. This was like the best All Star game in 5 6 years. I really enjoyed it, and you know what? Guess what? Who was Jokic and Luca? They played 5 minutes each. I think that's fine. I
Mhm.
don't really care. They were dealing with injuries. You know what? If you want to sit out, great. If you want to play 5 minutes, great. I think that's honestly fine. Does it put a little bit of a damper on it? Yeah, I guess. But what I will say and why I'm like more open in the past, like, you know what, play 5 minutes. I think the All Star game is really turning the tide in a way. And we saw a very competitive All Star game with this new format. I think the mini games really helped because players, it made it more intense. And players, you go out for 12 minutes, you play really hard instead of one big game. I feel like that really helped. And I feel like that's going to stay the case going forward. Maybe I'm just being too optimistic. But when you have a guy like Victor Wembanyama who's just going all out, and setting the
Mhm.
tone. I feel like that changes things for a lot of players. Anthony Edwards openly spoke about that after the game. And I feel like as time goes on, if more people have that like Wemby and even Kawhi mindset, it will be kind of lame. And, it will be like, people will be like, wait, why is Luca sitting out? And there's almost like some collective shaming going on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel like that's
Yeah.
kind of the best way to change it is just have guys like Wemby go all out. And then it's like, okay, Luca, you know what? I wasn't even thinking about that Luca and Jokic weren't playing. I was like, yeah, kind of whatever. We're still getting a great product. Still
Right.
great players, high level of competition, all good things. So yeah, cool. You don't want to play? Great. I feel like next year there'll be an even higher level of competition, especially assuming that like Wemby keeps that intensity
Mhm.
up. So overall, I feel like that's just the best solution. We got another question here from my boy Jacob Blocks. He wants to know just your favorite part of All Star Weekend.
I'd have to say my favorite part of All Star Weekend this weekend was the game itself, and it hasn't been that way in a while. I think in general there hasn't been a lot of bright spots in All Star Weekend in a while, but the 3 point contest was nice. Dunk contest, I don't know. We might have to change that up. But the All Star game, it was competitive. Like you said, the format kept you engaged. You had to pay attention because I wasn't considering like the score differential was like actually important, and so that keeps you invested in playing to the very end. And it was just really nice to see kind of this segment and group of the best guys in the world come together and hoop. We got to see the old guys lace it up together. KD, Kawhi, Jalen Brunson was on that team, and then we got to see the young guys with Book, Cade, and like they really bought it, and I was very excited to see that. Cade blocked KD, blocked Ingram. He was actually sitting down and playing defense. Jalen Duren was big bodying the OGs in the last game, rolling down the lane, grabbing every offensive board, almost dunked on Jalen Brunson. Like he was fully locked in. So I really enjoyed that. Enjoyed the competitiveness. I do think the teams need to be balanced out just a bit more because you look at the older Team USA, what was it, Stars or maybe I think it was Stripes. They didn't have a big man, like Bron is your big man at 41 isn't going to cut it, and they definitely needed a true center. So that's something they got to figure out a little bit. But I liked it, and I thought it was a very welcome change to the All Star Weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I mean, my lasting memory is just going to be this was a competitive All Star game, which has been rare in years past, and hopefully
Hmm.
this will be the year that we look back on and say, hey, things really changed in a positive way for the All Star game. I do agree they could have some minor tweaks to the format, but overall, I think it's in a good spot. Ordinarily, I feel like I would say, yeah, the 3 point contest, the All Star game was kind of ass, whatever. And that was sort of my impression going into Sunday. I'd be like, it was super cool to see Dame win on a torn Achilles. That was awesome. That's probably
Yeah.
going to be the high point. But the All Star game exceeded all my expectations. If I had to say like one like favorite, I maybe not specific moment, but like the last in memory for me is like Wemby setting the tone from the jump and just how quickly it turned because everyone sort of bought into it. And I feel like that's the power of like having a star player that's a leader that can sort of, change things in a real way for everyone. I feel like that's going to be my lasting impression. Obviously, Ant winning MVP was super cool.
Yeah.
Kawhi's like 30 something point game, and that was absurd. But for me, I'm always going to remember like Wemby when I think of this All Star weekend. And yeah, shout out Wemby, man. The league is in great hands. Next question we got is from our guy Ryan Drew, and he wants to know where does Rudy Gobert rank all time in terms of defenders, and will Wemby end up surpassing him?
We'll start with the first one. All time, I don't know. That is difficult. I've never been like a list maker or a ranker. That's not typically what I do. But when I think of like best rim defenders of all time, Hakeem immediately comes to mind. It depends on like how you evaluate eras and way eras. If we're just kind of open and accepting everyone, I think Bill Russell's defenses in the '60s, you have to include him as a pretty historic rim protector. Outside of that, like Gobert's peak was pretty insane, and it was pretty long. He has the accolades to match. He's one of those guys that like I do think analytics do help paint the picture of how valuable he is as a rim protector. What he was able to do for those Utah teams that had virtually no positive defenders around him, a bunch of undersized guys, I think was super impressive. So I'd say bare minimum top five, but for me probably somewhere at three or four. As far as Victor goes, as just a rim protector, yeah, I would assume if Victor Wembanyama stays healthy, I think he'll surpass Rudy Gobert because of the start of his prime was so young, and I mean he was a legitimate potential DPOY player last year, and so if he can stay healthy 10 years, like it's going to be hard to see many guys take that award from him. So I think Victor, if healthy, will surpass him.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, it is hard to look at some of these guys historically that we might have not watched and evaluate them. But I mean, the names you threw out, I would agree. Like Bill Russell, Hakeem, those are like two of the best defenders all time, bar none. I would
Mhm.
say Tim Duncan is another guy I would have in that
Yes,
conversation, even if he
yes,
didn't win Depoy. I do feel like it's
yeah.
funny to look at like Ben Wallace, Rudy Gobert, and Dikembe Mutombo are the three four-time Depoy winners. And I
Hmm.
wouldn't necessarily say those are representative of like the three best defenders of all
Yeah.
time. I'm a big Tim Duncan guy, so I would have him in that conversation. With that being said, I feel like Rudy's probably the best out of that bunch. Another couple guys I would say just in my lifetime, Draymond Green is definitely up there for me. I His antics are brutal, and I get that like he's not everyone's favorite player in the world.
Yeah.
I totally get that, but he did undeniably to me like revolutionize modern defenses in terms of his versatility. And I feel like he would have to be in my personal top 10. So yeah, Rudy, I would say top five level guy. I don't know if I can give an exact ranking, but somewhere within like the top 5 to 7 level guys. And then Wemby for me, assuming health, I think he's gonna go down as the best defender of all time. I don't know how many depoys he's gonna win, mainly based off the health factor.
Yeah.
But we saw he was literally in the depoy conversation from his rookie year. I personally still think he should have won it. And yeah, just not just what he brings as like a rim protector and as a rim deterrent, but he's also super versatile and he's super mobile. So I feel like that combination. I mean, he's a 7'4", 7'5" alien. Kind of inevitable to me. Yeah, so like I agree. Assuming health, he's gonna surpass not just Gobert, but every defender ever.
Yeah.
And then last question on Instagram before we move ahead to our one uh, Twitter question we got from my guy Bruce Velez. Out of the 8 playing teams right now, do you think any of them could win a first round matchup? And then quickly, so the 8 playing teams are the Magic, the Heat, the Hornets, the Hawks, and then in the West we got the Suns, the Warriors, the Blazers, and Clippers.
For all the East teams, I'm gonna say no. I don't. I don't quite believe in them. The West is it's interesting. There's some conversations to be had depending on a team, but depending on where a team like Golden State finishes, it's just so difficult to count out Steph and to count out that team because they've had that system and it's worked forever. Now, if they had Jimmy Butler, I would say definitively yes. Like I would believe in them to be able to win a first round series. But I'm on the fence. I'm not 100% sure. And I think the same goes with the Clippers. Like we don't know what Garland is going to look like. We don't know what Matherin is going to look like. Kawhi looks like he's ready to go scorched earth. Like he's ready to turn it up versus anyone, and I'm very excited to watch that. But even then, I don't know because the top of the West is so good, and if they get 8 or 7, you're going to be playing the OKC Thunder or you're going to be playing the San Antonio Spurs, and I just don't see anyone taking a series off of those teams. The Blazers are woefully behind as an offense. I don't like how they work in the half court. The defense is very nice. I love the defense. I love the amount of energy and hustle guys that they have. But I think they need a lot more as far as half court offense goes because the game is eventually going to slow down and you're going to need to get a bucket versus an established offense. So I can't count on them. I don't know. Weirdly enough, the Suns might be the team I'm the most optimistic about because we haven't seen a stretch of Jalen Green healthy, and it seems like he's just now getting back and working his way into the lineup. Devin Booker, the stats can't tell how good he's been this year. He draws so many tough coverages. He attracts so many bodies on the offensive end. I think he's really been the key to guys like Dylan Brooks eating, Colin Gillespie having some of the nights that he's had. Devin Booker's been an amazing playmaker and overall orchestrator, maybe like the best true combo guard that we've seen because I think Cade's been more of a real point guard this season, just a high usage point guard. But I don't know. They can knock down threes. They can defend. They've got big bodies on the inside. They've got some versatility. So I might say Phoenix is the team I'm most optimistic about possibly getting an upset.
Yeah, for sure. I think like on paper the Suns are the best position of the bunch to pull off
Hmm.
an upset. It's just the Western Conference is so tough, man. And when you're presumably going up against OKC and San Antonio, barring health, that's the one caveat I would say. I don't see any of the Western Conference playing teams pulling off that upset. The Suns, I would give a slightly better chance than the Warriors too. Just especially with the Jimmy injury, I just don't think there's enough secondary creation next to Steph there. I think their center rotation, I mean, Porzingis, that's a big question mark, but I have concerns about that still. And then going over to the East, I actually think like if I had to say, it's mostly just because they play in the East, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And this is also
Yeah.
where my delusional confidence in the Magic comes in. If I had to pinpoint one of these eight teams, I'm not going to pick them to pull off an upset necessarily. I'll say that. But with the best chance, I would probably say Orlando, simply because they play in the East and we've seen them be a really solid playoff team, even if they haven't won a playoff series yet. And that defense, I know it hasn't been great like we talked about, but that defense is a real advantage for them come playoff time. And hopefully Franz and Paulo get healthy, or Franz gets healthy, and the Franz Paulo duo develops nicely. And, I wouldn't completely rule it out. This is where the delusional Magic confidence comes in. But if I had to pick one of those eight teams, it would be Orlando.
I like it.
All right, so last question. This is from our guy Roundball Renaissance over on Twitter. He wants to know the player and team with the most to prove post All Star break.
I think you may have just answered it. I think the player with the most to prove is probably Paulo, and it's not because the shame of it is it's not altogether objective. Like, I think to the people that really know basketball, you know just how good he is and what he's done, frankly, working in a suboptimal environment. But to the masses, they are out on him and they just don't believe. So I think a run from him to end the season and into the postseason would be very important to kind of restore his standing amongst NBA fans, which once again I think is kind of ridiculous, but whatever. As far as teams go, the team with the most to prove, hmm, I think I'm gonna go. I think I'm gonna go with the Knicks. I think the Knicks were a lot of people's favorites going into the season because you don't have Indiana there anymore. Ideally, you should be able to beat this field of Eastern Conference teams. But Karl Anthony Towns has just looked like kind of a shell of himself at times. And I don't think this new offense has lended him the best role. This offense worked so well for Sacramento because Sabonis was that DHO hub, and Cat can pass like pure passing just as well as Sabonis can, but I don't think he has the DHO craft that a Sabonis has, and he doesn't play out of the same spots that Sabonis does. You don't see him at the top of the key unless it's an isolated drive or a trail three, but he has to be there a lot to make this offense work. So I'm a little concerned about that. And like you said, we've seen a bit of a regression and involvement from OG and McCall. So I'm just a bit concerned about them. And I think there's a world where they do see a team early on in the postseason and Cat doesn't have it going on. And let's say you get a rough shooting series from any of Brunson, McCall, and OG and Anunoby, and all of a sudden you're in a real dogfight. So I'm a bit concerned with the Knicks, and I think they're the team that overall has the most to prove because it could be really boom or bust for them.
Yeah, those are two great ones. Yeah, the Knicks. I mean, we talked about the Magic a lot, so I'm not gonna harp on
Mhm.
it too much. But I definitely agree with the Paulo point that if he doesn't turn things around, it's gonna be a rough summer of discourse. So even as like a neutral fan, I
Yeah,
hope he can go on a run here. But yeah, the Knicks are
yeah,
really interesting. Like you said, the consensus sort of favorite heading into the year. And yeah, Karl Anthony Towns does have a lot to prove. He was sort of my number one player with this one. But yeah, it will be interesting. I do think we could be in for another summer of big changes with the Knicks if they don't at least make it back to the conference finals. And who knows if they don't even make the finals, I could see some big changes. That seems like what this front office is all about, quite frankly. So yeah, I mean, they're in a really interesting spot, and I definitely agree with some of the skepticism that you mentioned and brought up there. For my team, we talked about them a bit, but it would be the Rockets. I do think it is maybe a little bit unfair to sort of put them in this conversation given the Van Vliet injury. But my thought process is more like prove that you should have stood pat at the deadline because I thought that was a really questionable decision. Prove that this team is maybe not going to win a championship this year, but is capable of winning one or two playoff series, even if you don't make it to the conference finals, whatever. Win a first round matchup with this core, and then have a really competitive second round matchup. Prove that this combination of Şengün and Thompson is capable of being your core moving forward because I don't know if that's the case given the shooting concerns there. Prove that you can figure it out in the clutch. We talked about Ime a lot. Another guy I think has some things to prove. So I think the Rockets would be my number one team. And then for a player, I wouldn't say it's like as high stakes as like title contention because this team is I think still pretty far back. But it would be Jonathan Kuminga. He's in an interesting spot. I thought he should have played with the Warriors. I don't think that's like a bold take. But yeah, I mean, I think this is time for him to prove that like you're not just a guy who can put up decent numbers and you can really contribute to maybe not the highest level of winning basketball, but you can contribute to some sort of winning basketball and you can be a net positive for your team. Prove that you're worthy of a bigger contract, which is going to be coming up for him again. Prove that you can really just be a high level contributor and that you're not just like a high volume, low efficiency scorer. I feel like he does have a lot to prove, and in this new system with the Hawks, I think he has a golden opportunity to do so.
100%. I love that pick. I think, yeah, Kuminga has a lot to prove because I agree with you. He should have been getting minutes in Golden State. I think that one's on Steve Kerr. It's on the front office. I don't like the way that they handled that. And we saw in the Timberwolves series, like he can step in and be a really impactful player. But now you've got a new situation. You've got a really offensively inclined coach in Quinn Snyder. And if they build around them, them some shooting, I would love to see what he's able to do.
Yeah, most definitely. That's going to be a sneaky, interesting team to watch. I almost brought them up.
Mhm.
I'm fascinated by this idea of just having so many different versatile forwards. I think it's going to be interesting to see play out. I'm not super high in their upside, even as like sneaking into the playoffs, but going to be a fun team to watch. And I like what Quinn Snyder does for sure. But yeah, I think we can wrap it up here. But before we officially close things out on the show, I just want to give you a chance to plug your work. Tell our listeners where they can find you at.
Yeah, you can find me at Collin.Hatfield Show, and that's with two L's. You can find me there on Instagram. You can find me there on TikTok as well. And I also contribute to At the Buzzer podcast, and that's at the and then buzz with I think three Z's. I'm pretty sure. So yeah, appreciate you. Hey, really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to have you on the show. It was a ton of fun, and we'll have to do it again sometime. But for our listeners, make sure to go check out Colin's work. He does a great job. And yeah, I'll close it out here. Catch you guys in the next episode. Peace out.